And so it's time for us to buckle up for our SATSA Runway to Recovery series. And we're starting in Gauteng, Free State and the Northwest. You can see we have an amazing panel for today's discussion. And they're here to share their insights, but also to kickstart your insights, to get feedback from you as we go through the next hour and a half, to get your insights on what that runway to recovery looks like. So as you can see, the chat is open. We would welcome any comments in the chat. And there is also a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So that Q&A folder, you won't be able to see the questions from other people who have posed questions. That will come through to me, and time permitted, we will pose those questions through to our panelists, have discussion around as many as we can, and also factor that into our recovery. A little plea from me before we begin, and that's to keep the discussion as constructive as possible. We've all seen the suggested timelines. We all feel each other's pain acutely right now. And we really hope this session will be a platform for you to share your ideas with industry colleagues and your thoughts so that we can pull something together that is meaty and really constructive about the way that we can move forward together. So please don't be shy. Share your ideas on the chat, share your questions in the Q&A, and I'll pose as many of those as I can during the session. As I said, we're recording it, so we will send that through to you in the coming days. And I'm going to hand over to David now just to give us a welcome. David Frost, not Ryan. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Natalia. Thanks so much. And good afternoon, everybody who's joined us. It's great to have you with us. Yeah, guys, we find ourselves at a particular juncture in all our histories. The first sort of month and a bit, I think we've all been putting out fires, dealing with the immediate issues, both in our businesses and in our sector. And, you know, as we emerge from that, it's now attention turns to the future and to hopefully some form of recovery. I think the impact we have all felt, and we will certainly get into some detail around that. So the big question, and I think that a lot of people have been feeling this, is that everything has been a little disjointed, and you know, how do we pull a unified and a consolidated voice around recovery, and at the same time have the very necessary conversations we've got to have with our government colleagues and partners, so that we get this into the very top of decision making, and that tourism is considered and our voice is heard in terms of the sustainability and the viability of the sector going forward. So let me just give you, before I get into just explaining and talking about the structure and how this all works, let me just welcome the panelists that we've assembled for today. So what we are doing from a SATSA point of view is we are breaking this down into regional bite-sized chunks. So today it's a virtual panel looking really encompassing our chapters in the Northwest and the Free State and in Gauteng. But the webinar in this virtual world is open to everybody, and it's also open to non-SATSA members. I think that's very important. You know, we act on behalf of our members. We've got an important duty to represent the sector, but not everybody is or can be a SATSA member, and we welcome input from all quarters. We have put together 4 of these, so we're doing Northwest, Free State and Gauteng today, and we'll be doing other parts of the country in the subsequent days of this week. What we've also tried to do, guys, is to bring in an interesting and a representative panel that speak to various parts of the value chain. So today I'm very privileged and we're very honored to have Rob Moore, who's CEO and owner of the Moore Family Collection, Jabu Matsalele, who is our Gauteng SATSA chair. He's also the CEO of Budget Tours. Johan Groenewald, many of you will know, CEO of Royal African Discoveries. Always say there was brother leader. He's market leader out of countries like India and emerging countries in Eastern Europe. We have the inimitable, love him or hate him, David Ryan, who's the CEO of Rhino Africa and a really constructive voice in terms of how we take things forward. And then, guys, we're very privileged today to have Ines Batz with us. Ines is from DAD Touristic in Germany and one of the largest outbound operators in the German market. And it's important that we bring a voice from our key source markets to bear. And I think that if we're talking about recovery in the short term, and as I say, let me not preempt the discussion, we've got to look to our main existing source markets for the bulk of that recovery. So Ines, we certainly look forward to your perspective going forward. Before we get into the meat of the thing, let's just take a moment to possibly clarify and just concretize what this process is about and what it actually looks like. So there has been views taken and opinions formed on tourism recovery and the way forward. The interaction and the views that governments have formed to date have not been the most inclusive. They have not sought a wide industry input, but now's not the time to recriminate and have discussions around whether that's right or wrong. We need to bring a consolidated and a considered industry view to bear. And the way that we've sought to do that is to set up a structured engagement that we can have with our government partners. So the industry view will be a consolidated view through the Tourism Business Council, but that is best done by the individual associations. SATSA represents the inbound industry, and we are seeking to consolidate a consultative view this week and get everybody's opinion. So the webinars are here to catalyze ideas with thought leadership, but anybody can make a comment while we're doing the webinar. But if you want to give us a more considered and written input, please send it through to communications@satsa.coza. And all inputs this week will be consolidated, and we will be putting an inbound perspective together in the early days of next week. At the same time, the similar process is unfolding in other parts of the tourism sector. So SATSA represents domestic, outbound, and corporate travel. They are engaged in a similar process. In the same way, SAKI represents the MICE industry. They will consolidate a perspective on MICE. And then there will equally be a perspective around aviation and access that will be consolidated. We then, as the associations within the TBCSA, will funnel this up into the Tourism Business Council, and we will be sitting down in a structured way with CISA and his team at SA Tourism to consolidate an overall South African tourism perspective. Guys, this is the best way that we can get a representative, considered, and a data-driven voice through to government. In the absence of this, we're all on our own, and we can all get on soapboxes, we can all shout as loudly as we want to, but it's going to be for naught. So this is what has been put into play, and hopefully you will all just join us and support the process going forward. So with that being said, let's get into the substance of the SATSA Runway to the recovery. It's a metaphor I unashamedly stole from the Aussies. They've stolen things from us in the past, not the least of all different sporting players, and they're generally just quite good at being WYSIWYG in terms of their terminology. So the idea is we're on the runway, we want to get down to the other end with enough speed to take off. And as Johan pointed out in some of our caucuses before this meeting, let's make sure it's not a dirt runway with a cronky, wonky Cessna at the other end, that we get off with enough speed to take our sector forward. So that's the metaphor. Let's get into the substance of the discussion. I'm going to go around to each of the panelists just for some opening remarks about where you see us currently and what needs to happen moving forward. I've just come off a webinar with CNBC, and I think one of the key points that was made there is that there has been some data generated in the first 40 days of this crisis. And I think some of our panelists will speak to that data, but we're in a situation where we're moving incredibly quickly. And what is true today is not going to be true next Tuesday. So it's incumbent on us to act and to act quickly. So with those introductory remarks, let me hand over to Rob to kick things off. Just some introductory remarks, and then we're going to bring it back after everybody's spoken into a more sort of structured discussion around timing, around issues around domestic tourism, and then in terms of the sort of inbound way forward. Rob, over to you.
Thanks, David, very much. So in my preparation for today's webinar, and then also, well, part of the preparation was not only taking a view of our own kind of forward runway, but also looking at the webinar that took place yesterday with TVCSA and SAT. And I must admit, so it's what's been very obvious to me is that the initial timeline that we were given in terms of possibly reopening after a lockdown. Because remember, when the lockdown was given to us by our president, it was initially 3 weeks, and then on the 9th of April, he extended it for a further 2 weeks, where we were set to reopen as an industry. We certainly anticipated it being the 1st of May. And what I'm seeing now, based on I guess, the leadership scenario of our industry reopening, and I think it's very important that we try and educate as many people as possible, because I don't think everyone knows what scenario that has been presented, where corporate travel, which happens in level 2, is only going to set to open in December and January, leisure travel only January, February, and then international travel possibly in February, March. And if I align our business to that, we're not going to be the same business at the end of the year, and more than likely we will have halved or be 2/3 of less. And in that, in terms of human numbers, we would probably have to reduce our staff 50%, which would be 400 people. And in listening to the presentation yesterday, it just seemed that I guess what came to mind was that analogy of the band kept playing while the Titanic was sinking. And I don't blame our leadership for not seeing what's coming, because I don't think we as an industry have truly presented the data, the numbers, whatever you want to call it, in terms of what we are forecasting. I think public opinion and person within the street, certainly the majority of employees that I have within my company, they are just anxious about what we're able to do or unable to do 1 month to the next month in terms of salary or retrenchments or tours or whatever it is. But I think looking forward, as we do in leadership positions for the business, and if we align that to the presentation yesterday in terms of this risk adjustment strategy, I mean, it's a horrendous scenario. And although this is a topic of a runway to recovery, we need the industry to be alive to recover it. And I think this industry could reduce by 60–70% by the end of the year, unless we change these restrictions on how we can operate now. I mean, on last night, there was a survey conducted in Cape Town by Cape Town Tourism, and there it indicated that 85% of the businesses felt that they would not be in business by the end of the year unless they could generate some revenue. Now, the survey that was presented, the first survey that was done, it was done pre the risk adjustment coming out. And there, even in reading the opening highlights of that survey, it indicated that 64% felt that they would be able to survive this. David, I can assure you that if they did a survey today, I think it would be 64% are going to be out of business, and a further 20% are probably borderline whether they're going to make it or not.
Rob, thanks. Thanks for those comments. Johan, can we sort of get your perspective?
Thanks, David.
Introductory.
Sure. I'm sharing the same view as Rob, basically. I think that Road to Recovery document that SAT has put forward I would rather call it the road to ruin document, actually. It was done keeping a certain political narrative in mind in what the lockdown should look like, and then what the strategy around that should be implemented. And it doesn't take the reality or the economic reality into account at all. If somebody presented that to me, and it says by December you can only start operating, you just have to ask a few questions. Is how long does it take, or how long can the average business survive without any revenue? Within the tourism industry, how long can they survive? Big companies, small companies, medium companies. There's a lot of companies that are smaller that's in the tourism industry, and actually the amount of time that they can survive without revenue is actually a lot shorter. So and it's commonly accepted that most companies can only survive 2 to 3 months without any revenue. Now you're putting a plan out there that says most companies have to survive nearly 9 months without any revenue. Did you consider that when you put that out? It actually, I'm flabbergasted to think that somebody would put such a document out and think that, yes, that's the way forward, without taking the economic reality into account. How many jobs will be lost before the end of December or the beginning of December, when the tourism industry can open again? If you ask those questions, you would never actually put such a document out into the market. That's my view, and I actually share the same with David. With Rob, that there will probably be very little left of the industry if we accept the road to recovery document or the road to ruin document that they've put out there in the market.
Okay, Johan, great. That's calling it like you see it. Jabu, can we hand over to you just for your introductory comments? Do you need me to share that screen?
Yes, please. I think the biggest question should be, can we really afford to wait until level 2? And you look at the document that it's been put out there, I'm not sure whether the document is a final document or it's out there for comment. If it's out there and it's a final document, then as a tourism industry, you're in a serious crisis. You look at the survey on the screen, it was completed by 1,610 respondents. And you look at the number one, 34% of firms says revenues are down 100% from a year ago. The second one, 58% of firms were unable to service their debts. Then the next one, 54% of firms were unable to cover fixed cost in March 2020. The last one, 50% of firms have reduced wages for more than 50% of staff. Really, the current inability of business to cover cost is likely to lead to more business closures, and that it can be avoided by easing some travel and tourism restrictions in level 3. We really cannot wait for level 2 to make a living. Should we wait for level 2, then we're in a serious problem. So I don't know. My answer is we really need to open or to start operating as soon as possible. We cannot wait for level 2, neither level 1. Come level 3, even if they say tomorrow, the tourism industry is definitely ready.
Thank you, Jabu. Yeah, I think just to to put it into perspective, the slide we put up was the results of the survey conducted by the International Finance Corporation in partnership with NDT and TBCSA, but it really just takes account of the time up to mid-April. And I think what Robin and Johan and Job were saying is that the perspective going forward is going to be far more dire than the picture that was painted in that almost transitional phase. That's almost the deer in the headlights scenario. You know, businesses having a look, well, we may be able to survive. I think with zero income going forward, the picture is going to become a lot bleaker. And I think that what we need to be doing is to, whatever recovery plan or everything put in place has got to be based on what the future looks like and not the past at a particular stage in time. I think these things are useful, but we're living in a very fluid environment. Dave Ryan, can we turn to you?
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everyone. I think what we're trying to do here is we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole, and we're trying to build a strategy around a risk assessment model, which kind of really doesn't make sense, which is what Rob and are doing. The problem with the risk assessment model, but rather the speed and the timeline of it. And there's been a lot of talk. I mean, at the end of the day, if we look at tourism, we're reliant on one thing. We're reliant on guests, okay? And whether those guests come from the domestic market or they come from the international market, because there's a lot of rah-rah at the moment about we need to get domestic tourism up and running. We've also got to have a look at that strategy. I believe that a domestic market strategy right now is a strategy of hope that is completely flawed because our economy has been absolutely desecrated. So to think that even if we slash our prices by 60 or 70%, to think we're going to attract enough of a domestic market or even a regional market to fill the void of international travel, it's not our railway because of the desecration. There is another way. And that is to support the industry further. So if we are to get behind a risk assessment adjustment model that literally sees domestic tourism happening sort of towards October, November, and international arrival numbers only starting to pick up from March, then the alternative has to be much bigger stimulus packages. And how do we subsidize the 285 billion rand that the industry sort of brings in on a GDP basis? And I think what we've faced here is we're faced with a runway which is way too long in terms of businesses to survive, with too little support in the short term in order to enable them to survive. And as Rob put it eloquently yesterday, you know, the numbers don't lie. I mean, you know, the surveys that are all coming out, and a lot of them are sort of pre-lockdown and pre-risk assessment adjustment notices, all tell us how dire the situation is. Businesses can operate on roughly about a 3-month basis. So if we are to build a strategy around a risk assessment plan that literally delays the return of domestic or international tourists, okay, we have to apply more focus to either that runway has got to be shortened, or there needs to be more support and there needs to be more financing to cover our industry in order to get through it. I don't believe government can have it both ways, that they can't provide the support, but they still insist on a risk assessment adjustment that prolongs the arrival of domestic and international tourists and simply expect the economy to absorb that shortfall. It's an unrealistic expectation at the end of the day.
Great, Dave. Thanks so much. So, yeah, if our plane is going to run out of fuel halfway down the runway, it's not going to get off. So, great collected series of sort of inputs from where we sit in South Africa. Ines, can we turn to, as you said, Spring in Frankfurt, and can you give us a perspective on Germany and, you know, where you guys are, and perhaps just talk us through where you are as an economy, where you are just in terms of how you're managing dealing with the whole COVID thing, and then just some brief comments on how you see the future and outbound travel opening up.
Okay, thanks, David. Thanks very much for having me here. We basically have the same situation in Germany right now, where we focus on domestic travel, but maybe on a positive outlook. I'd say that Germany is a couple of weeks ahead of South Africa when it comes to the lockdown, and we started to make our restart scenario a couple of weeks ago. It looked a lot worse than it now actually is, because Germany, since this week, the first of, we have 16 federal states, and unfortunately every state can have their own standard or safety protocols. But from this week onwards, the first states opened up again. And so now we're in discussions with our suppliers within Germany, how we can get tourism going, which is pretty difficult. It's not like we say we can travel again and then now everything is back to normal. Maybe just to give you an insight, the hotels can open up now, but only with a capacity of 60%, which obviously brings the hoteliers to tell us they need to increase the rates, because they have to run on a limited capacity. They have to follow the safety protocols, which means more costs. Sauna cannot be used, swimming pools cannot be used. They have 1.5 meters social distancing and everything. At the same time, we have our clients, and consumer rights are very tough in Germany, as you probably also all know. Clients are asking for reduction in rates because the services can't be used to what they have booked. So it's a very complex situation now. And I think on a positive outlook, we can all learn from that, what is happening now in Germany, the experiences we have, and we are observing this very closely at the moment. And it's little steps, but it is steps into the right direction. And a couple of weeks ago, we wouldn't have thought that Germany would open up again in May, or let's say June. And the same with Europe itself, the Mediterranean. We are now looking into the first countries to open up probably end of June or in July. And we are also looking into so-called road trips corridors. So it's all based on road trips, not using airplanes, where we can say, okay, we can open up certain countries, but we can only go to Croatia if we can pass Austria. So the whole of Europe is now working together, and they're discussing the ways of the safety protocols which need to be followed in order to open up. And my message to SATSA and to all of you, and now that you're very strong and you have a lot of power when it comes to, bringing forward your ideas also to the government, is that you speak with one voice and that you do some lobby work. We rely with our recommendations or our restart planning of long haul, and especially Africa, we rely on the recommendations of the World Health Organization, the European Commission, the German government, and our Robert Koch Institute, which is like the government scientific institution, which gives guidelines to the government. And Africa is not on their list at the moment. Yeah, they're focusing obviously on Germany and then Europe, but we need to have a voice for Africa. And according to the WHO, it's pretty difficult to put out a recommendation for now, because they are considering the whole continent, not the single countries for now. And they need more testings, they need more stats and figures to be able to give a recommendation. And what's happening in the European Commission right now is the single countries, also outside of Europe, they come and they approach the European Commission in order to discuss what kind of mutual standards or protocols they can use to open up borders again. This is obviously, we all rely on the air access. This is crucial for sending guests from Germany to South Africa, but we are, how should I say it, the tour operator, we are doing our work as well, and we push for the destinations yeah, and for our plan as well to restart a lot quicker than the current planning is. And I was actually quite shocked. I was following the SAT webinars as well, and now hearing that probably February is the month of, you know, bringing back international visitors. I can only advise you to push out to your government or do it at SATSA itself and push out to the European Commission and yeah, create awareness of how important tourism is to South Africa. So we can work on that and work together on the conditions to open up as quickly as possible.
Great, Ines. Thanks so much. Guys, I'm going to just sort of broaden it. And, you know, we're really trying to make this more of a discussion than a series of sort of statements. But Rob, I mean, any sort of thoughts flowing on from that in terms of timing and in terms of the how, you know, because what we need to do, and I'm sort of, you know, picking this up early on in this thing, is that we need, and I think Ines made a very good point about we need to lobby strongly with one voice. The discussion up to now has been a particular one. We went into lockdown. You know, that was the first response. But there is a wealth of sort of conversation starting out there about what opening up looks like and how we can do that. So, you know, part of what we need to get through, and there's some useful comments coming through on the chat line, you know, just in terms of we need to emerge from this process, you know, not with 20 things to do. We need 5 or 6 key things that we go to government and say, guys, this is the way forward. This is the can-do way forward, not the can't-do. So just some thoughts on the how there, Rob. And please, guys, if you want to chip in and follow Rob.
I mean, using the analogy I gave, I mean, the industry has been hit by an iceberg. And it's not about anything else other than fixing the hole. And I think the only way we fix the hole, one, is that I think we need to acknowledge that the structure, we need alignment in our communication strategy, and that has to be through TVCSA from all the research that I've kind of done on this topic. And we need to provide the data, the numbers, and I think operating procedures and sanitizing. I mean, we did that 3 weeks ago. We made an amazing infographic and we had that going and the operational teams were being trained on it. But actually, that was the band playing the tune when the Titanic had an iceberg and it just hit the iceberg. So we've now got to regroup. And this is what's been great to see in the media as well as in the industry, is that every hour counts. You asked how urgent this is. David, I cannot stress every hour that we lose today, we can add on another month to recovery. And I think that's the way we need to view it. I think we need to get the data. I think we need to identify 5 key statistics or numbers, and we need to align those 5 key numbers to what's going to tweak the ANC's attention, because ultimately they are the decision makers at the top. Right now, we need to talk about job loss. We need to talk about loss of foreign earnings. We need to talk about revenue drop in our own businesses and the supply lines. We need to talk about company closures. I already know 2 companies that have closed, and you know, as we've seen in the airline. So I think it mustn't be an emotional conversation. It must be a factual, numeric conversation that we should start capturing from our businesses and from our members. And we should be presenting it in front of the TVCSA, SAT, and our minister with a CC to the president, who I believe is a commercially minded, savvy individual. But we need to. This is not about a conversation and something that this industry does really well, which is a heart-led conversation. This is about the facts, and we need to show them how every hour, every day, every week that goes by, unless we change how we're operating radically in a very short period of time, this industry will not be in existence. Well, it'll be much smaller than it is currently today in 6 months' time.
Yeah, great stuff there. Anybody else want to come in?
David, can I just add there? It's very easy actually for SATSA to collate the information that Rob alluded to, that how many companies are facing closure. To get that information right now and timeously and quickly, I can tell you everybody knows where their company sits right now. So if you do a survey quickly on who thinks their company will be still around in a month's time, in 2 months' time, in 3 months, in 6 months, how many employees do they think they will have to lose? What is the revenue that they've lost so far in terms of revenue to the government, PAYE? It has to be data-driven, and we can't pull that out of thin air. Somebody has to collate it, and the IFC report that they did in April was a start to it. But that information is no longer relevant. We need updated information that we can go and fight the fight and show what the impact would be if on people, on income, and the wider economy and the wider community within South Africa if tourism tanks. Because tourism will tank if we don't do something about it. And if we stick to the timeline that is laid out, it will tank. So, yeah.
Yeah.
David, just to add to that, the other thing, it's difficult for politicians to have a political agenda if we present the facts.
Yeah. Something that I can just add to what David said earlier in terms of the domestic market and where the domestic market is as such, and if there's hope for it. I read a case study earlier in the week on how countries have pivoted to domestic tourism and why they've pivoted and who will be successful and who not. And that study was actually done for an organization that is headed up by a former head of the World Tourism Organization. And it basically, you have to look at what's the value of your inbound tourism compared to your outbound tourism. Because effectively it looks, so there's no outbound tourism and all of that money will go to inbound tourism. And there's a couple of countries that will actually benefit in that respect, because all that money that flows out of the country and goes outbound will now have to be focused to an inbound industry. And the countries that would benefit the most of those would be the UK, China, and Germany. So Ines, what is happening in your country, they're following the right ideas to get their tourism industry up and going. The same other countries that falls in the top countries that will benefit from that is countries like Australia, the Scandinavian countries, Canada. But then you look at the losers, the countries whose tourism industries will implode if they have to take all their outbound business and channel it to the domestic market. Your big countries that will lose their Spain, Italy, Turkey, the USA. But another country that is in the top 15 countries of who will lose is South Africa. South Africa alongside Greece, Mexico, those countries. Greece is opening up in the beginning of July to accept international tourists or tourists from the EU. Why are they doing that? Because they know that their whole tourism industry will implode if they do not focus on that. The projection is that without taking into account what COVID is doing to the South African economy will shrink by 57 billion rand if that is the formula that we follow, that we try and use our outbound business to channel it into the inbound market. It's a purely statistical analysis. But that just shows you our domestic market will not help us sustain the tourism industry. We have to focus on international, and we have to put things in place so that we can get to that stage, that we can get the international tourism and that we don't lose all those jobs.
Johan, can I add something?
Yeah.
Can I add something there? The other thing is we've got to have a look at disposable income of the guest. And I think why it works in Europe and why it's working in Europe and the UK and the US as a strategy is because of the massive stimulus packages that have been injected into those markets. And we've looked at this quite considerably. And even if you look at guest feedback that we're getting, the disposable income of lots of our international travels in those markets haven't been adversely affected. That's not the case for South Africa. There's not a South African, even in the upper middle class, that whose disposable income is not being adversely affected by COVID-19. And if you think, if we are going to lose between 4 and 7 million jobs as a result of this crisis, I can tell you most South Africans' disposable income is going to be going to supporting family members that have been retrenched or on short time, and it's not going to be used for things like domestic travel. The size of that domestic travel market is going to shrink simply because the disposable income is going to shrink. So we can't believe that the strategies, because they work for Europe, etc., will work for South Africa. On the flip side, our belief is that what it'll do is this could be a massive tailwind for Southern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, if we can get the plane off the ground, because we know that because of all these stimulus packages, and yes, fair enough, they're not equally distributed, but the type of client that we're attracting into Sub-Saharan Africa, disposable income hasn't been that adversely affected from our source markets. And if you combine that with exchange rates, you combine that with cheaper flights, you combine that with 2020 rates into 2021, there's some significant tailwinds that could really help our industry if we could simply alleviate the restrictions. And I'm talking to guests on a daily basis, and one of the things, and I think it's a role for TBCSA, is I'm talking to guests, and there's this difference between booking and traveling. And we go, okay, so let's assume worst case scenario, you're only going to be able to travel in March. From a tour operator perspective, we could continue booking, but clients don't want to book without certainty, and they're looking for certainty from associations, airlines, and governments that they're actually going to be able to travel in order to book. And the sooner we can provide certainty, even without moving the timeline, we will see a big upswing in our industry. And that's something we really have to consider. I think when you look at someone like South Africa, we cannot discount the international tourist market in terms of alleviating and growing our tourism industry. And we have to focus on those guest arrivals. We have to look at how long is it going to take us to get the arrival numbers. And we all know the strategy was to get another 5 million international visitors over the next 5 years. How long is it going to take us just to get the international arrivals back to pre-COVID numbers? And we've got to focus on that aspect of our market, because that is where the money is, and that is where the real recovery is. And we need to lobby government to understand that South Africa is not a destination that can recover off a domestic market. It requires international tourists, and we have to figure out a way how we can shorten the runway or help the tourism industry, if the runway is going to be slightly longer, through certainty, through assurances, through how we're going to facilitate international travel so that we can start the booking process. I also know that as a tour operator, you know, we're a complex ecosystem, but as a tour operator, we can't survive unless our bed partners survive. So even if it takes 9 to 12 months for tourists to arrive back in the beds, if we don't have an industry that supports our bed suppliers arriving, all the bookings in the world that we take now, which could cover us until gates come back into South Africa or Southern Africa, isn't going to help us either. In fact, it's going to compound our headache.
Great, Dave. Well, look, some really interesting stuff coming through here. But having heard this, because we spent quite a lot of time, on the timing and the immediacy, and I think it's great that we've kicked off this series of webinars by dealing with that elephant in the room firmly and squarely. So let's take that as one of our main sort of takeaways. We'll collate stuff around that. But turning to you, I mean, in terms of moving forward, because at some stage, we've got to be bullish that this will open up. What can we do, and what should we be doing around messaging, around presenting ourselves as a viable alternative? I mean, my sort of big-fingered comment on this was, when you look at the incredible numbers of inter-first world travel. I mean, Spain and France get over 80 million arrivals a year. When we were shooting the lights out, we got 2.5 million overseas arrivals. And we saw that in about 2016, with the geopolitical shifts in Europe, we also saw this after 9/11, when the first world became a little unsafe. We picked up a massive increase because we just get a small diverted bit of that travel. A lot of the first world travel that happens is around culture, antiquities, and food. All that stuff tends to happen in bad weather indoors. So it's big groups of people going around looking at cathedrals, etc. That's not the COVID tourism model, because it's difficult to do that. What South Africa offers is exactly what we see Mr. Ryan doing. He's sitting outside, great weather. You can do it in relative space, and we still have that magical wildlife element that a lot of people come for. So, is there stuff that we can still be looking towards? I think we've got a number of severe challenges, and I think, as I say, we've got a lobbying job of note to go and do with our government. But what else could we be doing around the demand side?
Yeah, I fully agree with you when it comes to the USP for South Africa. One must consider, once the world is opening up again, there will be quite a fierce competition between the destinations, especially then between the long-haul destinations. And South Africa stands for nature, for wildlife, for vast open spaces, social impact, sustainability. You all mentioned it. And I think this is the key you have to play with, or we all make our future guests aware of that. From what we see with other destinations we're dealing with, there's already quite a fierce or aggressive price struggle, because coming from the hotel side, not us as a tour operator pushing for it, we still don't know how air fares will be. Now, yesterday, I think there was the chairman of the IATA, the International Air Transport Association. He said that he's not thinking that there will be empty seats on the plane. If there will be empty seats, then the flights might be 50% more expensive. And then we're looking at a completely different customer coming to South Africa, especially, or to all long-haul destinations. It's not the cheapie anymore who's, looking for 2 weeks holiday for, I don't know, 1,000 euros. But we don't know yet. So maybe if the flight rate will stay the same, then it is not, then the price will be very important. But I think South Africa needs to create awareness of their USPs. All the suppliers, we need to be aware that the clients will be very flexible. They will, when it comes to cancellation fees, refunds, maybe clients can fly, maybe they're denied at the airport because of the COVID testing. And when they book, they want to have confidence. And I think this is where we must all work on. Obviously, health consciousness is a very big issue. And I think this is a challenge for South Africa, to pursue the clients that they're in good hands when it comes to an incident where they get COVID. But I think flexibility and confidence is the key. And like David said as well, that they need to feel secure, and they need to know that they can travel, even if it's only in March. So what we're doing now is basically we actively cancel our trips up until June, but then we offer clients to postpone their travels. And we're really doing our best to say, okay, let's travel at a later stage. But now they're asking, okay, can I travel in September? And we say, oh, no, not too sure. Can I travel in December? Oh. So it is difficult to postpone. And then they go to other destinations. So the earlier we have like clarity of when the borders will be open again, the easier is it for us as a tour operator overseas to, bring the clients back, even if it's not now, but only in 6 months. But then we can do it in 6 months. And at the moment, we just try to say, okay, book next year. It's pretty safe, but they want to have more confidence and more security when it comes to their travel date as well.
Thanks, Ines. Any thoughts from Jabu, Johan, Rob, and Dave around
Dave, I just want to
what we should be doing? But I mean, come in on any point, Rob.
Yeah, I guess in response to Ines, I think we've shown as an industry leading up to this that we've responded really well, and we've been very good at moving towards putting in all the right procedures to operate with certain regulations in place. But again, I just get a dread feeling when we start moving off the topic of changing the position we're in at the moment, because our business will not be around in March next year if we have zero income from now until then, and that's a fact. And David's right. Going back to what David was saying, I mean, he doesn't have a business if the suppliers are not around. And I think I would just encourage everyone to really stay very focused for the coming weeks until we have a structure and a system where we are consistently putting the information, the data, whatever you want to call it, in front of our leadership, so that they can ultimately take ownership for the destruction of our industry. Because there's all conspiracy theories and rumor mongering and all that kind of thing. We as an industry need to present the facts, what this industry is going to look like in 3, 6, 9, 12 months time. We need to put it to them consistently. And then I guess there's nothing else we can do. Our hands are tied. I don't want to waste time and waste my management's time in developing marketing strategies and wasting money on Google and social media and all that kind of thing, because we don't have a clear unlock position. When we've got that, then we can pour everything into it to reposition our market as a favorable destination. And we need to do this as well for the airlines. The airlines, we've got a relationship, a close relationship with Skukuza Airport, with Airlink, and I've spoken to them, and they've looked at that scenario that was presented, and they said, I'm not sure if I should be quoting them, but this is an industry forum. They will not be in business if domestic travel only starts in December. It's a reality, and we need to constantly remind ourselves to not be distracted about other topics, other conversations. We need to show people the impact that their decisions, that government's regulations are going to have on our industry, because it is factual. It's the real world.
I think you,
Dave, come in there.
I think you're absolutely right, Robin. It's like going through the acute phase of COVID. So in the acute phase of COVID, we were all running around trying to sort out and normalize our operations, move guests that were due to travel, and what are the phases of COVID for our industry? Because I think, as Ines points out, we know the USPs of Africa. We know that Africa is all about human connection, and we can deliver experiences that are second to none. We can drive demand for this destination. We've done it in the past. We'll do it in the future. Where this next phase of COVID is for us as an industry, and I think it was mentioned earlier a few times, is talking with one voice and lobbying government so that we are still here. And the only way we're going to do that is either more support from government or shorten the runway to help us with the recovery. And if we talk with one voice, if we talk with facts, if we put the onus and the responsibility of the destruction of the industry at their door, that they can't refute it, I think that's the only way we're going to move forward.
Great. Jabu, do you have any thoughts at this stage?
No, I fully agree. We cannot divert from what is happening now. Really looking at December, who's gonna reach December when the crisis is now? So talks are out there, but we really need to put our talks into action. I think there's a greatest need for a tourism COVID committee or something that will liaise with SAT and TPCSA, because really we are in a crisis. We cannot wait for December to come up with solutions. I agree with my colleagues. A daily survey is needed so that it can be always out there to show exactly who is struggling financially and what job losses are out there.
Yeah, sort of absolutely. Johan, did you have a point you wanted to make?
Yeah, I agree with everybody. We have to get the message out there that there will be nothing left of the industry unless they help us or they shorten the runway. Those are the choices. Otherwise, they must be upfront with us and say, we do not think this is viable for you. The whole industry, write it off with millions and millions of jobs, because that is effectively what they will be telling us if they do not see the light and understand the implication of their actions.
Yeah. I mean, look, I mean, I think it's an incredibly well taken point, and that's the purpose of these discussions. It's not only, you know, what are the issues, but which issues should we focus on, and where do we put our collective voice behind? I think, in fairness to SATSA, I mean, they, you know, the document that they produced, that, you know, looking at those timelines, was sort of produced probably 3-4 weeks ago when the sort of happened, and I think it was really informed by this. But, you know, what we're putting into play now, which I think everybody needs to take cognizance of, this is a collective. This is precisely the conversations that we need to have. There's some really good points being made, and I think the point about getting out and doing a survey, which we will be working on this evening, and hopefully we'll get it out this week to the SATSA membership, at least to start with that, to get a real-time look about what the next 2 to 3 months sort of looks like, so that, as Rob said, this can't be an emotive, you know, sort of soapbox sort of slanging match. This has got to be an unemotive, sober, data-driven approach that we carry through to government. But there are going to be other aspects of this, and I'm not negating that, guys. What about, and you know, somebody picked up on it in some of the earlier discussions, is we're a gateway into the region, and a lot of people come here are not just coming to South Africa. You know, they look at us as, you know, from a regional perspective. How do we play in that space, and what conversations should we be having regionally? Does anybody want to come in? Dave, do you want to kick that off? If indeed you see that as an important part of what we put into this strategy of ours going forward.
Well, I think, you know, in the representation of inbound tourism, it's critical. There's very few itineraries we sell which are not multi-destinational and multi-country. You know, you look at Kruger, where I'm sitting right now, the standard sort of itineraries, Cape Town, Kruger, Victoria Falls. So to not have a regional inclusion in the conversation would be absolutely ludicrous, because it wouldn't help if South Africa opened and you still couldn't access Botswana, Namibia, or even Zimbabwe. So, Absolutely, I think that's key. There's something else I wanted to point out, because there's a lot of commentary in the chat on it. It's this us and them, that we constantly seem to have this us and them narrative. And, you know, what is the approach to bring government into the conversation? Because this is supposed to be a collaboration. We're supposed to be in this together. What, you know, and I think the role we can play is providing data. I think the role we can play is providing more information. But how, you know, is TBCSA the mechanism? How do we adjust a narrative to, okay, well, we are in this together, so how do we have constructive conversations about it? How do we make our concerns heard and acted upon?
So let me take that head on. I mean, you guys are at the coalface. You're running businesses. You're dealing with it. You know, my job is you know, I'm the thin end of the wedge on this. And to speak very plainly and honestly, our ability to collaborate historically has not been great. So there's a lot of lip service paid to industry collaboration, but practically we haven't seen this actually play out particularly well. But what we have done, and it's literally come together in the last week, is there has been a unequivocal and a very firm request from the Tourism Business Council, from the TBCSA side, to SA Tourism, that we need to move to what we call a structured engagement. There have been a lot of conversations happening one-on-one, and various people speak to each other, but they're all anecdotal. So what we're saying is we need to scrum down together, and we need to come up with a consolidated voice that we both agree on. Now, what SA Tourism can bring is a perspective from the government side. They can bring research, they can bring a capacity to the table. And indeed, they've started that process as they should have. What we bring is the consolidated voice of the industry. And what we're hearing this afternoon is, what does that voice need to look like? So what is the substance that we bring to the table? And what we're doing, as I said in my introduction, Dave, is we're going to be sitting down. We've got a meeting on Thursday with CISA and his top team. And I want to pay tribute to him. I mean, he gets the urgency. He gets what we need to do. So we're going to be sitting down to thrash out what the modality of the structured engagement looks like. Our perspective is we break it into bite-sized chunks. Inbound is very different to outbound and domestic. And although we might have a relatively jaundiced and realistic view on the capacity of domestic tourism to take it forward, you know, Otto de Freycinet and people who play in that space may have a different voice. So let them collate their voice there. There's an important voice there around corporate and domestic travel, you know, both within South Africa as well as going out. Because in terms of bringing inbound in, airlines are not going to be economically viable unless we can fill planes going out of South Africa. So there's a discussion to be had there. And then equally, the other area that we've identified that's key in this is aviation and access. And principally, that's around airlines, air access. And there are people, there's the Domestic Airline Association, there's BASA that represents the foreign guys flowing in. And then there are experts, there's, as you say, there's the domestic airlines. And then there's also the really good work that we've done over the last 2 years around air access. So there's some air access expertise. So they've got to be in that scrum. But collectively, we've got to get into our areas, and we will sit down together with CISA and the government guys. And this is where we've got to thrash out what the common voice looks like. But it's going to funnel up into that process. But I do want to give people the idea that has been put in place. So those discussions are happening. And you know, we talk about urgency. They're happening on Thursday. You know, we've done some prior document sharing about what we think the way forward is, but we've got to be cognizant that, you know, the SAT guys might have a view on that as well. We'll put that together, but let's get on with the process. So I'm hearing good things coming out of this conversation around urgency, around data, and sort of taking that process forward. Does anybody want to, Rob, you want to come in on
Dave, just to add a small recommendation is as we move into a situation of collating data from the industry, I think I would recommend that we keep it really simple. You know, if we all have to fill in 3 or 4 pages of, you know, information that may or may not be relevant, I just think we need to. I would recommend that, you know, that within your realm of leadership and mindsets, and that you identify 5 indexes, and we really focus on that, because I think, again, the simplification of it will give it focus and penetration, and it'll just speed up the ability for that information to get there. So I would just ask that we don't, you know, at the end of this week, SAT says, okay, well, I'm going to put out a survey, and the next thing we get this link and we follow it, and we're in life support. We need to focus on that, not the 20 other elements that may be impacting our business. That can come in time, but I think we need to get to the crux very quickly and present it very simply to the leadership within our industry. That would be just my recommendation to take to your kind of think tank teams.
Very important, Rob, and you know, we'll certainly, within that inbound space, you know, I'm one pair of hands. We need to get people such as yourselves, you know, with me in that working group, so that we can actually, you know, just we need to take these ideas over the line and score the tries. You know, it's, you know, we can't be buggering around in our 25. So yeah, very well taken point. Anybody else want to come in on some other points? Ennis, you know, I'm cognizant of your time and your sort of input, and all the stuff you've said has been incredibly relevant. Do you have any other thoughts that you want to share with us? I mean, for example, are you and will you be working, and if you are, how will you be doing it, working with airlines? There have been reports that Qatar wants to fly to 80 destinations in June. And, you know, Joburg's one of them. I mean, so, you know, will the big operators be engaging airlines? And, you know, talk us through some of the areas, because if we can get a safety protocol in terms of, and I mean, weirdly enough, it comes back to that incredibly thorny issue of unabridged birth certificates. You know, you couldn't get onto the plane with kids unless you had the unabridged birth certificate. You know, is there something, ironically, that could be put in place with COVID, so that we know that when that plane load of people arrives, they're all cool, they're all kosher, and they can then be liberated to go out and spend money in various exotic parts of our country?
David, please allow me one comment with regards to what has just been said, what you're doing domestically. The same thing is happening in Germany, and people, travel agencies, tour operators, hotels, everyone is going on the streets. There are weekly demonstrations, and they are also collecting the data, and they forwarded it to government saying, okay, this is the loss of jobs and the loss of money and income, or whatever. So it's exactly the same situation. We are most probably in a bit more fortunate situation that the government is supporting not only the people who work in short time, but also the companies, but it's not enough. So just saying that we are in the same boat here. When it comes to the outlooks, yeah, we do speak with airlines. Now speaking about South Africa, SAA is probably also not the best example at the moment. Qatar told us that they want to fly from June onwards, but we don't have any further information. And referring to the Yatta chairman's interview yesterday, we don't expect any long-haul air access to any long-haul destination before Q4. So we, for our restarting plans long-haul, we're looking into November earliest. Considering all your neighbor, not only neighboring destinations, but also competitors like in Asia or Australia or the States or whatever. So I'm responsible for long haul destinations, so it's very frustrating on our side as well. But we continue now doing doing the contracts with you guys. We're doing our brochure, and we need to be just ready once the borders open up again. But air access is a big issue. We are also in constant discussions with Condor now, which is mainly focused on the European flights. But even there, we don't have any detailed information now how flight will look like. And referring to what I said before, we don't even know how the rating would be, how the pricing would be. Will it be more expensive due to the load factor? Will it stay the same? How long it will take, the whole process for check-in, boarding the flight, deboarding, having the tests at the airport. And yeah, I'm always wondering if people want to travel to a short-haul destination, if you need to spend 5 hours at the airport. This is also something nobody knows. It's the crystal ball. And we can only learn from what's happening in Europe now, from all the procedures, because a plane is a plane. And what they introduce now for the flights within Europe, they will most probably also implement on the long-haul flights. So yeah, I don't have any further information I can give you. It's all estimations, it's all crystal ball for everyone. And we just, need to wait and learn.
Great. Well, look, thanks so much for that. And I mean, really invaluable. We've got about sort of just under 15 minutes, or just over 15 minutes left. Natalia, can we hand over to you to perhaps just feed in some of the questions that have come through? Look, this is the first of these webinars. You know, we dealt with some big, hairy issues today. We're not going to get everything done. We're not experts on all the issues, but it's certainly focusing our discussion in terms of what our perspective should be like. But
thanks, David.
So to you, and you can pose it to whoever you deem most appropriate.
Choose whoever. Thank you to all of you who have posted so prolifically in the chat and shared. I just want to clarify for some of the questions that have come up around provincial split of webinar. So we have split the provinces up, not specifically to deal with the issues per province, because we understand that there are specific problems per province, but we also have to deal with things from a national perspective. So you have access to the chat, so please feel free if you have something specific to the province that you're wanting to ask, or you have a statement specific to the province, Gauteng, North West, or Mpumalanga, please feel free to post that in the chat. And we will incorporate that feedback when we're putting together all the protocols and all the information that has been shared so generously by everyone. Again, the Q&A is at the bottom of your screen. Click on the folder. You're welcome to pose a question in there. And we have 5 questions that have come through. So I'm actually going to give this one to David because it's a nice quick one from Nikki. Asking if we can make sure as an industry that all is done to keep the TERS fund available to hospitality for as long as we are not allowed to operate. So is that
to me?
Lobby for? Yes,
David
Frost. David Frost. Could you lobby for the TERS fund to be available to hospitality for as long as we are allowed to operate, or not allowed?
We will indeed, and I think absolutely, and I think what's coming through very strongly here is that the support measures that have been put in place to date have been, whilst however well-meaning they were, certainly they were unconsulted. There was not much consultation on them. And in terms of going forward, we need some form of support to sustain the sector, and we will be making those arguments unequivocally and as powerfully as we can. But that voice, and I mean, our panelists have made the point really well. That voice is as powerful as we are collective. So if we can make this on a collective basis through the TBCSA, that is the most powerful way we can make this argument. We will certainly be doing so.
Thanks, David. Steve has said, wondering how we can get involved with assisting with collating stats, etc., from the surveys as when, if they are sent out. So I think we will obviously sit together tonight, David, and come up with those, as Rob suggested, those 5 areas that we need to develop statistics. We'll get that survey out. And we did have a suggestion earlier to have that as a rolling survey, which I thought was a really great idea. So we will discuss that later, but I think it was a brilliant idea and a great departure point and something we can get done today. So thank you so much for that. Rob, in the absence of a tourism trade, what is the value and purpose of fully staffed government tourism entities? To what extent should SA Tourism and the Department of Tourism join in the sacrifices the businesses, and employees they exist to serve are being forced to make? Who wants to answer that question? You can see lots of smiles. I think this is probably going to have to go back to David Frost. David, do you have a view on this?
No, I've run down the relay track, and I'm passing the baton to Rob and to Jabu on this one.
Rob, I'm giving it to you. Rob, it's yours.
Natalie, read it again. Please. Please.
In the absence of a tourism trade, what is the value and purpose of a fully staffed government tourism entity? To what extent should SA Tourism and the Department of Tourism join in the sacrifices the businesses and employees they exist to serve are being forced to make? We're all in this together, but are we really?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know what their payroll strategy has been, and I mean, I don't think we're quite in it all together. So, but I you know, I think it just is what it is. I mean, I mean, I haven't taken a pay for 2 months, and my top team have cut to 50%, and it's horrible. And I'm not unique, you know. So it's across many businesses within the industry, because we see what's coming at us. You know, this is not a time for heroes. This is a reality which, unless we do this, our hand is being forced. So, but I think. So to answer that, we're not positioned in the same way. Their revenues, their salaries have not been impacted. And ours clearly have, and the majority of our staff. But I think again, we need to reduce the emotion and come back to, we need to focus on the data. And as David Ryan said, if we present that data in front of the leadership team consistently on a rolling basis, and it's factual, which I know is very difficult to get in today's world, but if it is factual, relevant information, they ultimately need to then take ownership of the decisions that they are taking, which is crippling our industry on a full payroll.
I'll add to that, Natalia. I mean, I think, you know, while we're all looking for urgency, this is a bit of a long game. And so while we'd like to all be in it together, we don't know, because there isn't that much transparency about how government is tackling payroll and those sort of things in organizations like SAT as an example. But the reality is if the tax base dries up, of which tourism is a significant part of that tax base, just like we've had to make the inevitable cuts and short times and reductions because we don't have revenue coming in the door, in the coming months, the revenue coming into government's door has to diminish significantly. So ultimately, they'll be forced into the same position that we are in today to make significant cost reductions and cuts. So I think it's more a matter of timing than anything else. But I don't think if this thing goes on as long as we think, I don't think whether you're a tourism department, you're a government organization, or you're a business at the coalface, you're going to escape the effects of what this pandemic's causing for all of us.
I'm actually going to go off piste and ask a question of my own. Sorry, I know we have 6 questions, but we're talking about surveys and trying to get to grips with data, and there is a large component of the tourism industry which is informal. So how do we collect that data? How do we collect the information from informal tourism, if you will, to strengthen the argument and to make sure that they're represented? Does anybody want to give that one a go?
I think that's a tough one, but I think what you can do is statistically, you know, you can project that, because what's happening in the formal sector has to be happening in the informal sector. So I think when you start to get a gauge of what's happening within the industry as a whole, you can project that into the parts of the industry that we cannot gather data on. And I think that would be the easiest way to do it. I mean, I don't think you're going to ever have absolute numbers, but you know, when I look at the SATSA database, when I look at the number of members that we've got, we represent a significant portion of the inbound industry. It'll give you a pretty clear view about how businesses are managing and what they're having to do, how they scenario plan for worst case scenarios versus sort of expected cases if we can reduce the runway, and we are successful in collaborating with government to shorten the runway, and what opening the economy starts to look like with guests arriving. But I think what we really need is the general trend, and you could extend that to the rest of the tourism industry per se.
Okay, and I'm seeing.
I think. Can I come in there, Natalia?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, you know, this is where, you know, I think Dave makes the cogent point. I mean, you know, we've got the sort of formal sector where people are members of associations and all sort of funnel up. But in any sector, that you know, we're the appropriate partner for them to engage in, because we do represent the majority of sort of businesses, and certainly businesses that employ people. You'll find a lot of sort of informal sort of you know, stuff out there. And I'm not saying they don't employ people, but in terms of the sort of big numbers, we represent that. So, for example, in the mining industry, the government deals principally with the Chamber of Mines because they represent 80% of the sector. It's not to say that the voice of people outside these associations cannot come through, and that's why I think on the webinar that CISA and Jafiwa had yesterday, they sort of spoke to that. So there is a concerted effort that if you're outside an association, there is a web address, I think at the TVCSA or SA Tourism, that please put your views in and let's give them. Surveys are just notoriously, as we know within SATSA, difficult to do even in a formal sense. But the survey is there to give you a snapshot. It's there to give you a barometer of what's going on, and they'll never be exhaustive. But I think it's important that we do that. And what we will do once we've knocked our short, sharp survey together is we'll share that immediately with CISA and his team, and maybe they can put that out on a broader scale. And any other association outside the TVC, and there are lots of them, and there's some are more vocal than others. It's incumbent on them to try and get that information out and to get a perspective from the members that they purport to represent.
Thanks, David. And that is my point. So, you know, a survey, we have a SATSA survey, but there's absolutely no reason why we can't disseminate that survey widely and make sure that everybody's inputting into it. Okay, Ines, you're up. Unmute yourself. So we have Andrea saying, can you please advise on flexibility regarding non-refundable deposits and cancellation fees, as we have heard from German agents that strict deposits and fees will scare off any future bookings to our region. It seems some suppliers in Germany are even allowing free cancellation up to 7 days before arrival. We've spoken how we need to think about how our product is positioned. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's well described. What we at the moment refrain from is taking deposits. Normally, if a client books through a travel agent through us, they pay 20% deposit. So this is waived now for bookings up until the end of I don't know, I think the end of October. But when it comes to bookings, people, and this is what we've seen now with when we had all the repatriation action being taken, we have to compensate the clients. So according to German law, we need to refund all the services which they have not used. So this is in hindsight, where we're now very reliable on you also not having cancellation fees. But going forward, it is, and this is what we're doing in our marketing now as well worldwide, saying you can book, but you can be free to rebook at any time for the moment now. So there's no prepayments and there's no cancellation fees if they decide to cancel or to rebook. It's just to build up the trust I was speaking of, because at the moment nobody knows if he can travel and when he can travel, and this is just to create a demand, you know, let's put it like this, offering people to book but not having any strings attached. And obviously we need your support then as well, because it doesn't help if we have bookings now for December, and then Germany doesn't allow Germans to travel to South Africa, and then we need to pay cancellation fees. Clients don't accept that at the moment, not at all.
Thanks, Ines, about building trust. It's a good point. I'm going to take a last question before I throw it back to David to close off. And this one is from Eugene. Could the panelists give their views on stimulus funding, specifically for the tourism industry? This is an area that seems to be sadly lacking, despite the job maintenance potential of tourism. The stimulus needs to be a lifeline while we concentrate on reopening our market, so lengthening the runway. Who wants to talk about the business relief and what prospects we have of having that expanded? I saw in the chat that we weren't very positive about having business relief increased, but perhaps our panelists have a different view. Who wants to take that?
Dave, Ryan, there we go.
I mean, I can talk from our side. There's, besides the UIF tours for employees that have been put on short time or temporarily laid off, businesses over 300 million rand in turnover are getting no relief whatsoever, which is just crazy. I think South Africa has, and when we look at it, we go, it's not that you need free money by any means. And South Africa has a really good banking, commercial banks as an example. I think we've got the infrastructure in order to push stimulus packages into the market. If they could be backed by government, we could use the commercial bank infrastructure to do it, which would really help businesses like ours. It would extend our runway quite considerably if we had access to relief funding, whether it was in the form of debt. It wouldn't even need to be in the form of free money, so to speak. I think there's a number of ways that they can do it. I just think there needs to be more of an appetite for creating relief funding for businesses. The 200 million that was set aside is going to go nowhere in an industry the size of ours. And I think building a better framework around how to access funding, what funding would be used for, and using private and commercial bank infrastructures in order to facilitate that would be a relatively easy way to go about it. But I do think a lot more needs to be done. The banks came to the party in the beginning, and yes, they're giving debt holidays, and they're giving debt holidays and interest-free holidays. But at the end of the day, if not only just big businesses, but if medium-sized businesses start to fail, and we do get the unemployment that we're anticipating out of this thing, the knock-on effects throughout the economy are enormous. So take tourism aside, if we don't focus on job preservation against all our industries, the knock-on consumer effect is going to be massive. Everything from the commercial banks through to government revenues. So I think stimulus packages, as we've seen them executed in Australia, as we've seen them executed in Europe, as we've seen them executed in the US, and that is something that government needs to pay a lot more attention to. And we fought about the 1.8 trillion rand that's sitting in the PIC fund, and the money that UIF is sitting on. And, if there was ever a time to start utilizing the bit of money that is left in the economy, now's the way to do it. And push it through those commercial structures so that people can have access to it. And even if we are required to repay it over a long term.
Thanks, David, for being brave. Clearly that fresh air has made you talkative. I'm going to hand over to the other David Frost, to close us off for the day. David, floor is yours.
Thank you, Natalia. Guys, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. And just thanks for your frankness, your honesty. Really appreciate it. Certainly focused where we're going. And I think it's just a really good point of departure as we move forward. None of this is easy. None of this is palatable. But I think that we've certainly, as I say, focused our approach. It's got to be, there's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of we need to get the data bloody quickly. And we need to put that together into a focused, short, sharp document, not a thesis. And we need to get buy-in from our partners. So we need to get SA Tourism involved in this. A lot of you are going to have thoughts and ideas, and I'm talking to everybody, 160 people who are still with us on this webinar. Guys, we need if you've got inputs, a lot of comments have come through on the chat line. There have been some key questions, but if you've got a considered 2-pager, please, it's communications@satsa.co. Send it through to us. I mean, one of the key areas where we do need input on was that last question. What should stimulus financial packages look like? We can't simply appear at the structured engagement with a begging bowl. We need to come up with innovative ways that we can put to government that are workable and will ultimately do the important work that we actually want them to do. So we will collate it. This webinar will be recorded. It will be available as well. And we, together with a team at TBCSA, are going to start the process tomorrow of starting to collate the key thoughts that came out of today's webinar. Ines, I really thank you for being part of the discussion. And your insights are important. And what we'd very much like to do is to sort of keep that channel open so that we can have almost a weekly interface. And it may well be through this inbound group that I spoke about, the inbound working group, possibly just tapping into you on a weekly basis to get any updates from Germany, any insights from your market. And guys, we won't get into it now, but there may well be some CADA deployment into that inbound working group. So I may well be knocking on some of your doors, because I think we need your energy and your wisdom in that particular journey going forward. So guys, thanks for your time. Just want to say tomorrow we move on to the Western Cape and Garden Route. And bear in mind, as Natalia said, this is a virtual world. This is the panelists and the people involved in tomorrow's discussion in the same way as the guys here are predominantly Western Cape and Garden Route based. We've got Ilana Clayton who's the SATSA Western Cape Chair and CEO of TSC. We've got Monica Yule, never short of an opinion. She's the Deputy Chair of SATSA in the Western Cape. Gavin Reynolds, who's also on our committee in the Western Cape. And then Peter Dross, who chairs the Garden Route SATSA committee from Fancourt. And then very importantly, we've got a real, somebody whose opinion I've come to value over the last 2 or 3 years. Dave Ryan Squeeze, Margie Whitehouse, who's the Chief Tourism Officer at Wesgro. She's joining us. And then from an international perspective, we've got Julian Harrison from Premier Tours in the States, who's going to come in and give us an opinion in terms of outbound travel there. But please clock in, and we look forward to the week as it goes ahead. Natalia, let me hand over to you for hand-holding, housekeeping, and getting us to a glass of wine.
Yeah, no, you're delaying this. So my thanks to everybody for logging in today and for sharing so willingly. We are saving the chat. We will feed that back through the channels, and hopefully we'll see you on tomorrow's webinar. And thank you for our panelists and what they have shared with us today. Ines, thank you so much for joining us. Have a lovely evening, glass of wine, and safe. Please stay safe, guys. We can get through this. Cheers.